This conference will now be recorded.
Are you on it? Right. Good morning, everyone. So I guess you've just had a class in gynec. So now we'll have one in obstetrics. I hope it's not an overload for you. But one of the things we have noticed is most of you are joining and then you're leaving halfway through the class or whatever. I think that is not correct. We will be making a note of all those who are there till the end of the class. And it is for you that we are making and putting a lot of efforts to make sure you're all there. These classes are not going to be repeated. And when you have your exams, you have not had a clinical exposure. And if you don't even have a theory backup, you know, it can be very difficult. So please make the best use of these classes. Okay. Right. So today's topic is preterm labor. So all of you know that for every pregnant woman, the two important things are that she's worried about is when she will deliver and how she will deliver. These are the only two questions any obstetric patient is worried about. So she's going to ask you, when is she going to deliver and have this lovely baby? The second thing is, what is the route of delivery, whether she'll have a normal vaginal delivery or cesarean. So out of this, one of the most important things is when will she deliver so that she has a safe delivery and a healthy baby. That's her utmost concern. So when should anybody deliver ideally? The best time is when the baby has reached term, because by that time all the organs would have reached maturity, they would have grown to the fullest potential, and that would be the safest for the baby to deliver. So that is, delivery should occur at term. Now, but often you find that some patients have delivered preterm. You find that patients have told, when you take a history, that last pregnancy she had a preterm baby in the 7th month itself, or in the 8th month they had to put their babies in a neonatal care unit, they had to put them under ventilators, and they had a lot of morbidity and so on. So whenever you hear a history about this, you have to be very, very careful so that this pregnancy, they don't go through the same problems. However, sometimes in the first pregnancy itself, where they've not had any history because this is the first exposure, and they would still land up with a preterm baby. So how can you prevent this? Because if you have a preterm baby, now obviously the baby has not grown to term, which means all its organs are still in the process of evolution and development, which means they will not have reached its full potential. So they will not be able to function optimally. Right. So in other words, we will not want any patient to deliver preterm. So it's very important that you identify who are those patients at risk and then take precautions. Or if somebody actually goes into preterm labor, can you stop it and prevent any complications in the preterm baby? Okay. So today's class will be based on that. Now, when will you call it preterm? So preterm is when the onset of labor occurs prior to completion of 37 weeks. So term is after 37 weeks. So anything before 37 weeks of gestation is what we call preterm. And if it is beyond, that is, it has not attained its minimum growth potential to survive outside. So that is what we call period of viability. So anything beyond 20 weeks and less than 37 weeks is what we call a preterm labor. Now, this 20 weeks is about WHO, but in our, like say in our setup, even up to 28 weeks, sometimes we will not be able to sell. So it differs from country to country, but as per WHO, anything between 20 weeks and 37 weeks would be preterm labor. Now, when will you call it threatened preterm labor, and when do you call it established preterm labor? So threatened is when the uterine contractions are just beginning to occur, but there are no changes in the cervix. That means only the beginning of contractions. However, it is not strong enough to cause changes in the cervix. You know that whenever you have to identify a patient in labor, you always see progressive contractions which are increasing regularly in intensity, duration, and intensity. That's what we call normal labor, provided they are associated with cervical changes. And what are the cervical changes? The opening of the cervix, what we call dilatation, and the shortening of the cervix, what we call effacement. So only when you have these changes, you call it true labor. So similarly, in preterm labor also, when there are established uterine contractions, which are more than 4 in 20-minute period or 8 in a 60-minute period, then you call it significant, provided there is an effacement of the cervix of more than 80% and a dilatation of minimum more than 1 centimeter. So these are the prerequisites to call established preterm labor. We call it threatened preterm labor. It's just threatening to start into labor. Now, just to define the terminology once again very clearly. So anything before, so what is preterm, what is term, what is early preterm, what is late preterm. So that will help you in the prognostication, which babies will have a better prognosis. So before 34 weeks is early preterm, ideally. So 33 weeks, 6 by 7 days. So simply you can say less than 34 weeks is early preterm. Late preterm is 34 to 36 completed weeks. Now you know that from 37 to 38 weeks, 6 by 7 is your early term. So normally term we say from 37 to 41 weeks, or now even up to 41 weeks. So you have early term and term. Then you also have late and post term. So for you right now, I want you to concentrate on early preterm and late preterm, just for prognostication. So less than 34 weeks is early preterm, 34 to 36 completed weeks is late preterm. Okay. Now, what are the 4 direct causes of preterm labor? Why should anybody go into preterm labor when nature itself has made it in such a way that people should go into labor at term, provided all of the organs have gone to maturity? Now, why somebody should have a preterm labor? So sometimes there can be a spontaneous, unexplained preterm labor. There is no cause there with intact membranes. That means membranes have not ruptured. The membranes are surrounding the baby, and it spontaneously goes. There is no triggering factor at all, and we cannot explain the cause. Now, some there can be rupture of membranes. So idiopathic preterm rupture of membranes without any reason, membranes have ruptured. Whenever the membranes rupture, what happens? There can be release of prostaglandins, and that can cause onset of contraction. So there can be preterm labor with intact membranes. There can be preterm labor with rupture of membranes. Then there could be delivery for fetal or maternal indications. Sometimes where we ourselves hydrogenically deliver the babies early, when there could be problems the mother, problems with the baby for continuing pregnancy, like suppose it has uncontrolled hypertension or an uncontrolled diabetes, any continuation of the pregnancy episode of eclampsia, then we want to cut short that for the safety of the mother. So such maternal indications, or maybe in the fetal there can be indications like say patient baby has gone into distress, there is severe oligohydramnios. So then we also need to do for the baby. And sometimes twins and high order multiples, where there will be multiple pregnancy, there can be overstretching of the uterus, as a result of which there can be release of prostaglandins, and that can lead to an early preterm labor. So you could have then as divided into 4 direct causes. One is spontaneous idiopathic with intact membranes, spontaneous rupture of membranes, delivery due to maternal or fetal indications, and any multifetal pregnancy. Okay. Now coming to the whole cascade. So I want this one thing. Right. So the parturition cascade, as you can see here, is in relation to the fetus, mother, and the placenta. So there is all a link up between the fetus and the mother. Only then this whole process of parturition can start. Whether it is in a term baby or a preterm baby, there is an association between the fetus and the mother. So you can see here that when the fetal hypothalamus, which is releasing the corticotropin releasing hormone from the fetal pituitary, will affect the fetal adrenal ACTH. This ACTH will cause the fetal adrenal to release cortisol, and also the fetal liver also is involved with the release of DHEA, and that releases estrogen. Now you know that progesterone keeps the uterus quiescent, whereas estrogen keeps it, stimulates the uterus. So the effect of this is essentially the cortisol and the estrogens will act on the placenta, and they cause release of oxytocin, prostaglandins, increased estrogen and decreased progesterone, the ratio which is altered, and also increased interleukins. So all these things lead to an increased uterine contraction. You know that oxytocin will cause contraction. These prostaglandin E2 and F2 alpha are contractile agents. An alteration in the ratio wherein estrogen is more than the progesterone. That's the estrogen dominance, and interleukins 168. They all lead to increased uterotonic drugs. Then also in the mother, the hypothalamus and especially acts on the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin, and this oxytocin causes the myometrial receptors, the uterine myometrial receptors, to be more sensitive to prostaglandins and oxytocin. How does it become more sensitive? There will be increased gap junction, that is between the myometrial fibers there will be more gap junctions, and there will be increased sensitivity to the PGF2 alpha, and all the stretch receptors, the numbers and sensitivity will increase. As a result of all this, what will happen is the uterine muscle becomes more sensitive to the uterotonic drugs or the agents, and that leads to a uterine contraction and a labor. So there is a link between the fetal and maternal hypothalamo-pituitary axis. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, coming to the next. Okay. Now coming to the etiopathogenesis of preterm labor, just what I was telling in the previous one. So there will be an activation of the fetal. So you could just got it. So the activation of the fetal HPO axis will lead to release of the corticotropin releasing hormone, increasing cortisol levels, which also along with the choriodecidual bacterial colonization. So whenever there is infection, so that if there is any infection of the chorion and the decidua due to bacterial colonization, what happens? It causes release of substances like tumor necrosis factor, the interleukins 168. Similarly, when there is pathological uterine enlargement, like in twins, polyhydramnios, what will happen is mechanical stretching the uterine walls causes release of interleukin 8. There will be more gap junctions and more prostaglandin synthetase, all of which will act on the chorion, amnion, and the decidua. So this chorion, this fetal membranes, and the decidua of the uterine wall, all of these things will act on them, and they will release what is called increased amount of prostaglandins, that is PGE2 and F2 alpha, increased thromboxane A2. It will increase the proteinases, collagenase, and all these substances, which finally lead to increased myometrial contraction. They cause the cervical ripening, leading to softening of the cervix, cervical dilatation, effacement, and finally preterm labor and delivery. So I want you to know that the final common pathway is by stimulation of the chorion, the fetal membranes, and the decidua by various methods, either due to the activation of the fetal HP axis or the colonization of the local areas with infection or an enlargement, all of which will finally have the same common pathway. My next student. Next one. So the pathophysiology of preterm labor involves at least 4 primary pathogenic processes that can result in a final common pathway ending in a spontaneous preterm labor and delivery. That means the premature activation of the maternal or fetal HPA axis, that is the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis. There could be inflammation or infection. There could be hemorrhage, decidual hemorrhage. What will happen when there is hemorrhage? There will be separation of the membranes from the decidua. The chorioamnion will separate from the decidua. And also any reason for pathological uterine distension. So all these things play an important role for pathogenesis of preterm labor. So they are the summarized causes. Now, so fetal adrenal axis is very sensitive to ACTH. It causes increased production of cortisol, stimulates the 17-hydroxylate trophoblast, and causes a decrease in progesterone secretion. So whatever be the mechanism, finally the 3 things that have to occur is the softening and dilatation of cervix, the contractions of the myometrium, and finally the rupture of membranes. All these together will land up in a true preterm labor. Now, coming to what are the risks of spontaneous preterm birth. Now, unfortunately, these causes have been put up in a huge number. I wanted to change this next class. I think I will just re-coordinate this. But in general, I want you to remember that the various causes could be divided into maternal causes, fetal causes, and placental causes. So when it comes to maternal causes of preterm labor, you have something like the features of the mother, maternal features, then you have maternal diseases, maternal infections, then you have pregnancy related history in mother, then present pregnancy causes, write down some certain factors in the present pregnancy, then you have the mother's uterine status and the placenta, finally certain fetal causes. So we come to each of these. Okay. Although this is a whole lot of things, I just want you to remember that what are those features in the mother that can cause preterm labor? What are the risk factors? Typically age, extremes of maternal age can lead to preterm labor. Then socioeconomic status, low socioeconomic status is more prone because they can have more of infections, anemia and so on. Then physical activity and over, let's say women with hard work, manual labor, those can lead to easy preterm labor. And also with those with certain maternal habits like smoking, drugs, cocaine. So smoking is pretty common even in the low socioeconomic status people. They have these BDs or chuttas or whatever they can have. So the four things are the maternal aspect are maternal age, their socioeconomic status, their physical activity, and their typical habits. That is about the maternal basic underlying characteristics. Then coming to maternal diseases, any maternal disease like which is not related to pregnancy can also stimulate a preterm labor, like maternal hypertension. You can have maternal diabetes. You can have renal disorders. You could have various immunological disorders like antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, SLEs, and so on. So any systemic disease in the mother unrelated to pregnancy can lead to preterm labor. Now there are certain diseases which are very specific in pregnancy. We'll come to them. They can also be maternal infections. What maternal infections can cause? So you can have any febrile illness for any cause, like pyrexia of any reason. Maybe malaria, maybe an ear infection, maybe a dental infection, any infection anywhere in the body, you know that it causes release of prostaglandins, and prostaglandins cause contraction of the uterus. So any febrile illness in the mother, any diseases like say toxoplasmosis or any infections like that, chorioamnionitis, that means infection of the fetal membranes, chorion and amnion, that itself like ascending infections. If there is infection in the vagina and unattended to, it can lead to ascending infection. That is why we insist on local hygiene. Then urinary tract infections, that can also lead to any preterm labor. And very specifically bacterial vaginosis. All of you know bacterial vaginosis caused by Gardnerella vaginalis. It's a mixed infection. So that can lead to even preterm rupture of membranes. So infections in the mother. We talked about characteristics of the mother. We talked about maternal conditions, medical conditions. We have then maternal infections like any febrile illness, non-specific infections like malaria, infections of the uterus like chorioamnionitis, and it can lead to vaginal infections like bacterial vaginosis, any of these infections. Then I said you could have uterine factors. In the uterus, you could have like uterine anomalies, uterine malformations like a unicornate uterus, a bicornate uterus, or a uterine didelphys, or a arcuate uterus, any of which can decrease the space available for the baby inside, and that itself can lead to preterm labor. And secondly, in the uterus, you have a cervix which should maintain its closed structure until it goes into labor. But if the cervix is incompetent, you know what is called cervical incompetence, that can also lead to preterm labor. So the uterine factors could be that. Then coming to the past obstetric performance. If the past obstetric history suggests that there was a history of preterm labor, there's a very high chance of recurrence in this pregnancy also. So there can be repeated preterm labors. And this pregnancy, what all things can cause preterm contraction? In this pregnancy, any history of threatened abortion, that means if they had bleeding in the first trimester or second trimester, they are likely candidates for preterm labor. If they had multiple pregnancy in this pregnancy, there can be an over-distended uterus, you can have hydramnios, polyhydramnios, or multiple pregnancy, you can have preterm labor. So these are all the present situations. And then coming to the placenta. The placenta can be due to a placenta previa, that is a low-lying placenta, or an abruption, that is a premature separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. You will have to terminate the pregnancy. So any placental causes. Now coming to the fetal causes, you could have various fetal causes also, like there could be a fetal distress when you will yourself terminate. There could be fetal anomalies like an anencephaly baby with severe hydramnios. There can be so any factor in the fetus, in the mother, in the placenta. I want you to remember under these headings. So these slides are actually showing a mixture of all these things. I'll run through them anyway. So in a history of previous spontaneous preterm birth, history of genital colonization, infection of instrumentation, UTI, sexually transmitted diseases, bacterial vaginosis, okay, cervical dysplasias. Then you have like diseases like diabetes, hypertension, obstetric complications like preeclampsia, previous uterine surgeries, placental disorders like placenta previa abruptions, medical disorders. Coming to fetal disorders, you could have fetal compromise, chronic IUGR, an acute distress or a chronic poor growth, excessive hydramnios or oligomnios, fetal hydrops or ascites. You can have birth defects and fetal complications like in twins, like twin to twin transfusion and so on. So these are the so many causes that you can have. So the reason you need to know this is to keep in mind whenever any of these underlying causes are there, you must anticipate. So prediction of preterm labor is extremely important. So how do you predict preterm labor? So first of all, you assess the risk factors. As I told you, these risk factors, you must look for any of these risk factors in the mother, in the baby, and in the placenta. First of all, assess them. Then you do, in your clinical examination, you examine a vagina, do a pervaginal examination and see the cervical status. Is it shortening? Is there an effacement? Is there any dilatation? Are you able to put a finger inside? Is it allowing any or showing any dilatation? Then you always, after a clinical examination, you must confirm by a investigation. And the best gold standard is an ultrasound examination. Also, you can detect fetal fibronectin in the cervical or vaginal secretions because this substance is present between the membranes and the decidua. Only when they separate, you find this fetal fibronectin in the vaginal secretion. So, presence of this fetal fibronectin secretions means they have separated and there's every chance of preterm labor. Also, you must do a home uterine monitoring. You can do a home uterine monitoring and see if there are contractions in the uterus, and there are certain biochemical markers. So, all these things will help in the prediction of preterm labor. So what are the clinical predictors? So history of prior preterm birth. As I told you, if somebody had a history of preterm birth, there is a very, very high chance of recurrence. Then presence of multiple pregnancy, presence of infections, symptoms of preterm labor. Now, what are the biophysical predictors? Biophysical, what is that you can observe? So the uterine contractions, more than 4 in an hour, more than 4 in a 20-minute period, or more than 8 in a 60-minute period. Just want to make the change. And a Bishop score of more than 4, a cervical length on ultrasound showing less than 2.5 centimeters. So these are the 3 things: uterine contractions, cervical changes as seen by Bishop score, and a cervical length confirmed by the ultrasound. Then you have biochemical predictors like fetal fibronectin and others like interleukin 6, 8, tumor necrosis factor if you have the means to test for them. So you have clinical predictors, biophysical predictors, and biochemical predictors. Now, the gold standard is to see a short cervix. And how do you see that? You can measure the cervical length using transvaginal ultrasound. So out of ultrasound also, the transvaginal route is better than the transabdominal. The reason is the transvaginal ultrasound, the probe is very close to the cervix. You put it through the vagina, it's close to the cervix, it's better. And if you are going to use a transabdominal ultrasound, you need to do it under full bladder. If you are going to use a transabdominal ultrasound, the full bladder which is required to see through the abdominal ultrasound can press on the uterus, and it can make a short cervix appear long because of the pressure. So whenever there is a ballooning or opening up of the cervix, just because the bladder is compressing, it might just close and appear like a long cervix. So the distortion is more with the transabdominal ultrasound. Always use transvaginal ultrasound for the gold standard measurement of cervical. So typically you can see, and also make sure uterus is not contracting when you're doing the ultrasound. If there's a contraction on the uterus, because in established preterm labor you could have uterus contraction. What will the uterus do? If it is contracting, it may give a false sense of a normal cervix or a long cervix, or it can also cause pseudofunneling. Sometimes the contraction can cause pseudofunneling, as if the membranes or the liquor is getting into the cervix. So it can give a fallacy. So whenever the uterus is contracting, you make sure you take 3 measurements, and they should be 5 minutes apart. The 3 measurements are taken 5 minutes apart, and after the 3 measurements, take the lowest, whatever is the smallest length of the cervix that is observed. You make that as your correct cervical length. So short cervix is very, very important for identification. So the cervical length measurement before 24 weeks of pregnancy in asymptomatic women who are at high risk. So whenever you have patients with high risk, you must predict whether this will really go into preterm labor. So you do a measurement, and anybody who has a cervix less than 25 millimeters, you can predict they are going to go into preterm labor that before 35 weeks. And the sensitivity and specificity is 65 and 75%. Positive predictive value, negative predictive value being 33 and 92%, which means it is a very good test. If you do a cervical length measurement before 24 weeks, it should be more than 25 millimeters. Anything less than 25 millimeters, this patient is going to go into preterm labor. Now, the second thing we were talking about is fetal fibronectin. So the next thing is the fetal fibronectin is an extracellular matrix protein which is present at the deciduo-chorionic interface, as I told you, between the fetal membranes and the deciduo. Deciduo is on the uterine wall, chorion is the fetal membrane. So between the two, this extracellular matrix contains fetal fibronectin. So whenever there is an disruption of this interface, when will that occur? When there is an infection or an inflammation, or there is separation because of bleeding, like abruption due to uterine contractions, it causes release of fetal fibronectin into the vagina. So the cervicovaginal secretions will contain fetal fibronectin if the patient has gone into preterm birth, or rather will go into preterm birth. So this is a very good predictor for spontaneous preterm birth. So you can take like a swab from the ectocervix or the posterior vaginal fornix. You put a swab in the vaginal fornix or in the ectocervix, just take a swab. If you find that between 24 and 34 weeks, if it is more than 50 nanograms per ml, there is high risk of preterm. Anything more than 50 nanograms per ml of fibronectin will predict preterm. You could do it with ELISA or whatever method of testing, but sometimes you might get a false positive and you might unnecessarily panic. When will you have this false positive? If it is contaminated, the vaginal secretions are contaminated with maternal blood or semen, or if the patient has had an encerclage, or membranes have ruptured, or preeclampsia. In all these conditions, you might get a false positive. So, and the good thing about it is once you have a positive fibronectin, it means that within 7 days, that patient is going into preterm labor. So you can predict when the patient is going to go into preterm, how much time you have. So fetal fibronectin is a good test, but you must keep in mind what are the possibilities of false positive. Now, coming to cervical insufficiency. What is cervical insufficiency? It is defined as cervical changes in the absence of uterine contraction. That means there need not be uterine contraction. The cervix is so soft and so weak that it will just open up, and without uterine contractions also, it can give condition. And the patient. So the cervical for preterm labor. A very specific length will usually remain constant between 14 to 28 weeks of gestation. Cervical length at 24 weeks is normally 35 millimeters. Normally it should be 3.5 centimeters. So if you find that the cervix is effacing and shortening progressively distally from the internal os, you can see an ultrasound even before you do a vaginal examination. So a non-invasive best method would be you do an ultrasound and you see the length of the cervix. If it is getting less than 3.5, you know you are in for insufficiency. Now, what are the other biochemical markers? We were talking about tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 168, C-reactive protein, and so on. So there are various markers which could be, if available, which could also help in the prediction of preterm labor. Now, this is all prediction. But once somebody has gone into preterm labor, how do you confirm it? What makes you diagnose preterm labor, which is established? That means symptoms of backache, low pelvic pressure, any discharge from the vagina, either bleeding or a discharge, which can make you suspect. When you put your hand on the abdomen, the uterus can be seen to be contracting with or without pain. The contracting of the uterus can be felt as a hardening of the uterus. Now, what are the signs? On examination, so that was the symptom. On examination, you might find cervical changes. I said that cervical changes should be effacement of 80% or more. Dilatation ideally more than 1 centimeter, that means 2 or more centimeters. And a length of cervix, that is the effacement, should be less than 2.5 centimeters. Or you find an funneling on the ultrasound. So you've done an ultrasound, if you find funneling or a shortening of cervix less than 2.5 centimeters. All this will confirm or diagnose established preterm labor. Now, once you have established preterm labor, you want to know what you can do, what are the causes, or what is the status? Can you stop this preterm labor, or should you continue and allow her to deliver? So the most important thing or the worry is delivering a preterm baby. And if you're going to allow this to go on, the baby which will come out preterm will be having a lot of morbidity and maybe chance of mortality. So the ultimate aim is to allow the pregnancy to prolong and not allow her to deliver. But if you have to allow her to continue pregnancy, you must make sure it is safe for the mother. It is safe for the baby. Only then you can continue. So what investigations will you want to do? You take a complete full blood count, do a blood grouping and typing, do a urine analysis, because very often it is common to find UTI as a precipitating cause of preterm labor. Also send for cervicovaginal swab for culture and also fetal fibronectin, of course. Do an ultrasound. Why ultrasound? One, you will know the fetal well-being, the estimated weight of the baby. You will also know the length of the cervix and placental localization, because placenta also, as I told you, the placenta previa or an abruptio can also be a cause. So if you find an abruption, the placenta is separating, there is no fun in waiting. You have to terminate the pregnancy. If you sit and wait, the whole of the placenta will separate and the baby will die if you sit in it. So you must assess the well-being of the fetus, the estimated weight of the fetus. Look for the cervix. If it's getting very, very short, there is no way you can also see the placental localization. Then you can also do a serum electrolytes and glucose levels whenever you're planning tocolysis, because some drugs, tocolytics are drugs which are used to stop the uterine contractions, and some of these can alter the glucose level, the glucose metabolism. So you also make sure that the electrolytes and glucose are under control. Now, how would you prevent preterm labor? That means whenever you find by your prediction or by your assessment of the patient, when the patient is not in preterm, patient these patients, you don't want them to go into preterm. You know she's at risk. So you want to do something to prevent preterm labor. So even before pregnancy, even before she has pregnancy, if she has come to you and said, Doctor, I want to plan pregnancy, what are the good things I can do? Sometimes people are very smart. No? All this Google Baba will be telling them. So most of these IT professionals and all the smart ones would have done a lot of search on the Google before even they plan pregnancy. They come for a pre-conceptual counseling, which is a good thing to do in a way. And they'll say, what are the best things we can do now, right now, before we start a pregnancy? So in such cases, you could actually tell them that if these are the risk factors, suppose you find that they have some risk factors, you can say, in case you get into pregnancy, there is a chance that you might have preterm labor. So these are the things 1, 2, 3 which you could do. Like, so you can advise them before pregnancy, preconceptual folic acid supplementation for more than 1 year in patients who are at risk for fetal birth defects and also preterm labor. So you can advise them folic acid. Second, you can advise them to quit smoking because that's one very high risk factor. Then also, if somebody is undergoing IVF cycles or infertility treatment, we better not introduce more than 2 embryos because they are at a risk of having multiple pregnancy, which can lead to overdistension and so on. Also, if somebody is having a very hard working a job or a career, or like say a night work, standing for more than 6 hours, or working more than 42 hours a week, all of which can be at risk for preterm, you would have to advise them to change their working style or career pattern so that they don't become at a risk of preterm labor. There are also those who are having uterine anomalies. You know that uterine unicornate, bicornate, these are at risk. So some of these patients can have a prophylactic NSAID class. Also, if somebody has medical disorders, I told you some medical disorders in the mother like hypertension, diabetes, asthma, antiphospholipid antibodies, all these can be predisposing factors. So these conditions, if they have given you history, make sure that they have come under control. Before they start pregnancy, they must have all these medical disorders in control. And if they have any underlying infections like UTI or STDs or bacterial vaginosis, or must be treated before you start a pregnancy. So these are preventive aspects before pregnancy. Now somebody has you in pregnancy, during pregnancy, and you assess and you find she's at risk of preterm labor. You have done all your risk assessment. Then what are the things you can do? During pregnancy, you can give them vitamin supplementation. If she's smoking, you have to obviously ask them to stop smoking. Give them calcium supplements. Periodontal care is very important because the teeth hygiene, very important because if they have dental caries, as I told you, infection anywhere in the body can cause release of prostaglandins and that will cause uterine contraction. So all genital infections must be looked for and treated. Any UTI, any vaginal infections, everything. And you definitely make sure that you counsel them regarding personal hygiene. And also a very important factor is stress. That is why, you would have seen your elderly women at home, the grandmothers try to, pamper them. The girls are pregnant and they make them stress-free. They are given all types of things to eat, and whatever their desires are, they try to fulfill them because they want them to be very happy, avoiding stress. So stress itself can cause release of hormones like cortisol. And we saw that cortisol can be one of the initiating factors for preterm labor. And also, they can self-monitor vaginal pH. So that all tells you during pregnancy what are all the precautions you can take. Then one other thing is you can monitor the cervical length by ultrasound. At 20 to 24 weeks, you look for the length of the cervix. You know that is a good predictor. Anything less than 2.5 is a predictor for preterm labor. And advise them enough bed rest. And if required, for those who have infections, you could give them antibiotics in the second and third trimester. Give them low dose aspirin for some patients where there's indication. They can be advised intake of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids and progesterones, because a lack of progesterone or deficiency of progesterone can cause a uterine contraction. You can supplement them with injections like 17-hydroxyprogesterone caprate weekly, and where indicated, you could give a prophylactic NSAID. So like a history of previous preterm labor, history of cervical insufficiency, those you can prophylactically do NSAID. You don't wait until the cervix opens, then you quickly put an emergency NSAID. No, you could do prophylactic NSAID or an ultrasound guided NSAID. Okay. Now, when the patient, in a patient where they didn't come to you with risk factors, or you landed up with preterm labor, what do you do? So you had 3 types. One is when a patient is not pregnant and you are asking for pre-pregnancy advice, that is one group. Second is they are pregnant, but you found risk factors and you gave them some prophylactic advice to prevent them from going into preterm labor. The third is where they have landed in preterm labor. So this is the third situation. So there is no question of prevention. It has already landed in preterm labor. What do you do? So the most important thing is, since managing a preterm baby requires very good NICU care, there should be a very good neonatal unit because they should be able to handle babies which are very preterm. So if your hospital has it, fine. If you don't have it, it's important you transfer the mother to a place where they have facilities. So an antenatal transfer of mother and fetus to the most appropriate hospital. Then give them antibiotics in labor to prevent neonatal infection, especially with group B streptococci. So antibiotics to prevent neonatal infection. Then glucocorticoids, that is steroids to the mother to reduce neonatal problems of respiratory distress syndrome and intraventricular hemorrhage. So you give them steroids to decrease neonatal complications of respiratory problems. Then also you can give magnesium sulfate at the time of preterm labor, especially before 32 weeks, to decrease the incidence of cerebral palsy. So the four things that you have to keep in mind is: one, shift them to a place where they can manage the small babies. Two, give them antibiotics to decrease infection in the neonate. Three, give them steroids to mature the lungs so that they don't have respiratory distress and intraventricular hemorrhage. Four, you give them magnesium sulfate to prevent cerebral palsy. What is the role of antibiotics? Do you give to everybody, or there are some certain indications? So antibiotic therapy in women with preterm labor and intact membranes is not effective in prolonging pregnancy or preventing preterm labor. So when you have intact membranes, normally there is no role for antibiotics. However, whenever you find that there is membranes are ruptured, so there can be ascending infection. Or when there is, you have a group B streptococcal infection, yes, you can give them to prevent group B streptococcal prophylaxis. You can be given for women with premature rupture of membranes, or a specific treatment if you find that identified in urine culture, you can give them antibiotics. So you can restrict antibiotics to such things. Now, when do you give tocolytics? In whom to give, and what is the role of tocolytic? Tocolytic is a drug which stops the So tocolysis in preterm labor is administered only for a short-term delay delivery. What is the time you're winning for? By delaying to allow time for surfactant treatment, so that there can be time for maternal transfer to a facility where there is care for NICU, or where you need time for group B streptococcal prophylaxis. So for these three things, you might have to give a tocolytic to postpone delivery for a short time. Let the lungs mature because of giving a steroid. Let the mother be shifted to a good tertiary care center, and let them have enough time for group B streptococcal prophylaxis. Now, what are the different tocolytic drugs we have in our armamentarium? One, nifedipine, that is a calcium channel blocker. It prevents calcium reuptake. You know that calcium is responsible for muscle contraction. Now, if you stop this calcium reuptake, it can decrease the smooth muscle contraction. So it can be given in the dose of 20 milligrams stat, followed with 10 milligrams TID, or 4 times a day. But sometimes it may be associated with slight dizziness, flushing, or headache. Now, the next is terbutaline. So terbutaline can be given IV, oral, or subcutaneous, but right now we're not using much of this, as we used to find a more risk of hyperglycemia. All these beta-2 agonists, which we are using like Duodenone, Isoxsuprine, Ritodrine, Terbutaline, we are not using much nowadays because of this risk of these complications. Then you have other drugs like magnesium sulfate. So magnesium sulfate is, you know that the magnesium will suppress the calcium influx. So it will compete with the calcium and decrease the calcium uptake across the cell membrane. And when the calcium is decreasing, obviously the myometrial contraction will subside. So here magnesium sulfate is given as a 4-gram bolus, followed by maintenance dose of 2 grams. Right? So magnesium sulfate, which is here, is the drug of choice for eclampsia. So the same can be also taking a role as a tocolytic. So however, it can lead to flushing, nausea, headache, drowsiness, sometimes blurred vision, and so on. Right. The Ritodrine is also another drug like terbutaline and Isoxsuprine, and it can be given oral and IV. But same thing, it can also lead to tachycardia, palpitations, and tremors. Typically, all of these beta mimetics will lead to these symptoms. So we are not using much of these. The best thing which we are using right now is nifedipine, that is a calcium channel blocker. Now, when should you not give tocolysis? That means you don't want to stop the labor, let it go. When anything which is detrimental to the continuation of pregnancy, either to the mother or to the baby. When it is dangerous to continue pregnancy, you don't want to give tocolysis. Like maternal conditions like severe preeclampsia, better you deliver her. Severe abruption, the whole of the placenta is separating, you can't wait for it to continue. Or there is any bleeding from any cause, or obvious infection like chorioamnionitis, if you keep the baby inside, it will lead to maternal infection, a neonatal infection, and sepsis. Or there is fetal death, fetal distress, or any fetal anomaly which is incompatible with life. If there's an anomalous baby, why you want to continue the pregnancy? Or a very severe growth retardation, then you don't want a baby to continue where the environment is so hostile. So there can be maternal causes or fetal causes of terminating. So whenever the mother's life is at risk or the fetal life is at risk, you must terminate. There is no role for tocolysis. Okay. Now I said steroids. There is a role of steroids. That is, you can give betamethasone 2 doses, 12 milligrams. You give them IM 24 hours apart. So if you are giving 12 milligrams today, tomorrow same time another 12 milligrams. That is one protocol. The other is dexamethasone, where you give 4 doses. Here you give 6 milligrams every 12 hours. So you have to give 4 doses. And this is basically for the fetal maturation to avoid fetal respiratory distress as well as intraventricular. And the benefits when the infants are benefits of this will start 24 hours after you give it, and it lasts for 6 days after the treatment. So this is definitely a way where you must give to all the fetuses which are at risk of delivering between 24 to 34 weeks of pregnancy. Okay. Right. So you gave them antibiotics, you gave them tocolytics, you gave them steroids, and you decided whether you have to, how do you have to manage. So once the patient is in labor and you are not going to give them tocolytics, say you decided not to give tocolytics because of a certain contraindication, how will you manage labor? So in the first stage, the patient is put to bed to prevent early rupture of membranes. Normally, we allow them to go around, in the early first stage, normal term patient, we allow them to walk around. Here, you put them to bed so that the membranes will not rupture early. You give enough fetal oxygenation by giving oxygen to the mother by mask. You could give epidural analgesia if required. And continuous fetal monitoring is essential. You have this cardiotocograph in the labor room, you would have seen that machine, CTG machine, you do a continuous fetal monitoring. And there is no reason for cesarean section unless there is an obstetric indication, like say, if there's an abruption, malpresentation, or some other hypertension which requires immediate termination. So there should be no reason for cesarean unless there is an obstetric indication, not just because it's a preterm. And you must have facility for a good NICU. Neonatal care unit should be really good and available. Now, once the patient has gone to second stage, that means cervix is fully dilated. The baby has to come out. The delivery of the baby in the second stage. Here, there should be no hurry. Let the baby come out slowly and gently. The birth should be gentle and slow to avoid rapid compression and decompression. You don't want strong contraction, quickly pushing the baby out. No, that will cause rapid compression and decompression of the head. That can cause bleeding. So don't allow that. Allow the patient to progress in labor slowly, gently. And if there is any delay or obstruction to the baby and baby is struggling to come out, give a nice liberal episiotomy to minimize compression of the baby's head so that there will not be any perineal resistance. Give a nice perineal episiotomy at the time of contraction. And sometimes you might apply a forceps. Never apply vacuum. The baby's head is so soft, and you should never apply vacuum. But sometimes, just to terminate the second stage or cut short the second stage, if the mother is having a failed secondary forceps, you could apply prophylactic osmotic forceps. Here, the cord is to be clamped immediately at birth. Normally, whenever the baby is born, we tell slightly lower level from the placenta, and then we allow for the blood to go from the placenta into the baby. We wait for it. But here, we want to clamp the cord immediately. We don't want all the blood to get into the baby so that cause hypervolemia in the baby of all this low hyperbilirubinemia, because the baby is still premature, its organs cannot take care of it. So we don't want this overload. Clamp the cord immediately, and as early as possible, shift the baby under the neonatologist in the NICU so that they can take the required precautions and care required for maintaining the baby. So what are the baby problems in the baby? So you had to deliver, you had no choice. So then what are the things that you can anticipate in the baby? What are the problems that you might anticipate? Short term and long term. So every organ in the baby has not completed development. That's the whole worry, isn't it? So it is preterm. If you had waited until 37 weeks, all the organs would have matured. Now, unfortunately, it has delivered either iatrogenically, or you have to deliver, or it delivered on its own, whatever be the reason, the baby has come out now. So each organ will show some problems. So what will happen to the lungs? As we said, the lungs will suffer from respiratory distress. Why? Because there isn't enough surfactant. When there is enough surfactant, the Lungs are very soft and pliable and they expand whenever there is air entry. But here there is no surfactant. So what happens? The baby is not able to expand the lungs properly with each breath, and it leads to respiratory distress. There can be air leak. There can be bronchopulmonary dysplasia and apnea of prematurity. All this can happen immediately after birth. And in the long term, if the baby survives, what can happen? Bronchopulmonary dysplasia, reactive airway disease, asthma. These are the long-term problems that the baby will see. Now coming to the gastrointestinal tract, you know that these babies, obviously the organs are not fully developed. So what can happen? There can be intolerance to feeds. If you try to feed the baby just like a normal baby, no, they will not be able to tolerate. They can lead to necrotitis. There will be failure of growth because the baby is not able to take enough. So there can be failure of growth. And also there can be hyper because of the immaturity of the liver bilirubin. You might find the failure to thrive. And there can be cholestasis. So coming to the immunological problems, there can be hospital-acquired infections, system has not developed, so easily they can get infected. Okay. Then what about the cranial nervous system, central nervous system? It can lead to giving them steroids to prevent intraventricular hemorrhages. There can be periventricular leukomalacia, softening of the ventricles, and there can be hydrocephalus. Now, many of the times you find that these babies may land up with cerebral palsy, cerebral atrophy, hearing loss, and neurodevelopmental delay. That is whenever the baby is born preterm, we are very, very cautious to make sure that the babies are followed up long term and see that they don't have any of these. So the hearing loss and all that should be assessed periodically and then corrected. Then coming to the eye, what problems can be there? Retinopathy of prematurity. So that is one great problem, and long term it can lead to blindness, myopia, strabismus. So that is the reason. Look at all the problems. Every organ, lungs, intestine, immunity, the cardiac, central nervous system, eyes, everything is affected. That is the reason you don't want any baby to go preterm. You must pull every pregnancy to term. Okay, coming to the cardiovascular system, what can they have? They can have hypotension, patent ductus arteriosus, and pulmonary hypertension. So you know that in the fetus, the ductus arteriosus is patent. Now it may continue in the preterm baby because it has not reached term. And in the kidney, because of prematurity of the renal system, what will happen? They will not have the ability to concentrate urine. So there can be water and electrolyte imbalance, acid-base disturbances, and you know kidney has a major role in hypertension, controlling the blood pressure, renin-angiotensin system. So these babies can lead to hypertension in adult. So what had happened in the baby at the time of birth can have long-standing effects later on in life, like hypertension. Now coming to hematological problems, they can lead to iatrogenic anemia, need for frequent transfusions, anemia of prematurity. So hematological problems. And what endocrinological problems can they have? Hypoglycemia, transiently low thyroxine levels, cortisol deficiency. So this can lead later on in life to impaired glucose regulation, increased insulin resistance. So they could have future diabetic tendency. In other words, the cardiovascular system, the renal system, the hematological system, endocrine system, you can see every system in the body having immediate problems and long-term problems. So I want all of you to understand that must be avoided at any cost, unless delivering a baby is really essential for maintaining the health of the mother of the body. You can see the amount of more baby can have. Every system in the body can be affected. So very, very important. You allow every patient to reach term pregnancy. That is the ultimate aim of every pregnancy, and for every obstetrician to safely deliver her, and ideally by vaginal delivery, leading to a good outcome. I think that's done. So I will put up those slides there. Right.